I just thought I would do an episode. I haven't done a Substack live. Hi, Manny. I haven't done a Substack live for a little while. The reason for that is, hi, Alex. Good to see you again, Alex. Um, yeah, I haven't done a Substack live for a while because I've actually been, thanks for Love Harps, I've actually been on holidays for a couple of weeks. So I haven't had great internet access. I've still been able to post things and do things, but I haven't been able to do Substack lives. I've really missed it. I've been trying to keep up to date with everything that's been going on. So I've been up in a place called Noosa, which, if you don't know, most of you would know, is about an hour and a half north of Brisbane. So it's a beautiful spot on the beach. So I spent the last couple of weeks pretty much on the beach swimming. It's getting warmer here, obviously, because we're on the in the south. So we're in spring now, but it's starting to get quite warm. So you guys are kind of heading into winter up there. It's like we live in upside down world here. But yeah, I really enjoyed being in Noosa for a couple of weeks. If you ever get to Australia and you ever get up near Brisbane, hope you and your family had a great time. Thanks, Car. We did. We had a fantastic time. It's so good to get away from everything and, be on there's something about the beach that makes you feel refreshed and everything, like just being in the water and the sand, the salt, just surfing around and stuff. It's such a great feeling. I really do love it being near the beach. So yeah, it's been fantastic. But yeah, so I hope everyone in America's been okay. I have been keeping up with the news, and one of the things that I've been thinking about while I've been away is something that a lot of people know, but it's a bit of a problem, and that is that a lot of people who voted for Trump were low information voters. And a lot of the reasons that he gets away with so much of what he does is because low information voters generally vote for Trump, but they're becoming a bigger slice of the pie in American politics. Yeah, upside down world, and not just the weather. Glad you had a nice time away. Everybody needs that. Yeah, I know. And here's the thing, Marnie. It's much easier for me to like just log out of American politics because I don't live in America than it is for you guys. Because even if you go on holidays, you're still like in that country. It's an awful thing for you guys to be experiencing. So I do feel really guilty that you guys have it so bad over there. I try to do as much as I can to support United America. Not MAGA people in general. But yeah, you guys got it pretty bad. And look, all I've been seeing in the last couple of weeks is basically a lot of stuff from Trump, which is just more lies. And again, he gets away with it because people aren't paying attention to politics as much. And I actually looked. We appreciate. Thank you, Alex. We what I've noticed is often try to compare what's happening in Australia or, because I also follow what's happening in Europe as well, like other Western cultures, and um, try to, thanks, Peter, and try to sort of understand what's happening in America because, oh, thanks for thinking of us, same ones left over here. Yeah. Well, look, based on the people who voted, only about 30% of legible voters in the United States actually voted for Trump. I mean, again, you could probably blame the people for not going out to vote or thinking that they were sort of, they didn't really think that it was a big idea. You know, I do kind of, I don't dislike people like that as much as, like, for example, MAGA. Although, even if a MAGA supporter became a Trump, moved away from Trump, I still think that's a positive thing because at the end of the day, hi Quimby, at the end of the day, you guys have to live with each other, and you can't, like, unless you're going to have like split states, you have to live with each other. I do think, hopefully, that once Trump goes, that the temperature can lower a bit. I mean, again, that's the irony that they're always telling the left they need to lower the temperature, while while they always talk about civil war or or going into states in Chicago and using the National Guard and all that sort of stuff. And this is the thing with the low information voters. Like, Trump is able to say in Portland that the place is a war zone, right? It's a war zone. Now, now when I heard him say that, now I did hear that he had a conversation with the governor and mayors of Oregon, and basically what they said to him is they said, "Oh, you're looking at images from 2020 during the BLM riots," and he apparently acknowledged that he wasn't sure if he was seeing the right information. Now, it's hard for me, hi Natasha, I could see it. It's hard for me to understand. This is the thing about Trump. How much of what he says is lies? How much of what he says is because he's extremely stupid? Marnie, I do blame folks for not caring enough to vote. I can't help it. I'm not going to be hateful for anyone. Thought what my grandmother used to be say, kill him with kindness. Yeah. Hi, Joe. I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know. I totally understand why people, I can totally understand why people in America would be upset with people who didn't vote. Um, I totally get that, especially what you see with what's going on. The only the only thing about people who didn't vote is that a lot of them didn't vote based on because they weren't keeping up to date with what was going on in the news. So it's very understandable because if you're watching the news like we do in America, hi Melissa, good to see you. If you're watching the news in America like we do, and it's 2024, and suddenly you see Trump showing up in court. You see all these indictments against him. You see Trump doing all these awful things. And then you watch the polling, and his polling is actually not going down. And you're heading into the 2024 elections. And yeah, and you're thinking, how is that? Hi Mary from Melbourne, my fellow Aussie. Good to see you. G'day, g'day. And yeah, so I think I can certainly understand why people would look at the people who didn't vote last year and think, oh well, you kind of let America down, and they did. But a lot of them did it because they weren't paying attention to news. And so I think there's a difference between that and people who do pay attention to news, but they still voted for him with all the information that they know. To me, they're two separate people in a way, even though I totally get it, because some people, especially since COVID, they've diverted their attention with TikTok or streaming services, or they just log out of politics, and they're not inclined to talk about politics or think about it, and so they just don't vote, and they fall for this thing, which is they're both as bad as each other. The both as bad as each other thing is a big problem, not just in America, but around the world, where people just go, well, Trump is bad, but so is Kamala. Nobody, Natalie, did you know that ADF leadership quietly visited the White House last month? Yeah, I did know. I did hear about the ADF, which is in Germany, as Natalie would know. Hi, Sandra, good to see you. Going to the ADF, yeah, and this is it needs to be compulsory voting in America, yeah. And so Mary's from Australia. Compulsory voting, she's got a good point. It's something that I've talked about before. Compulsory voting that we have in Australia, and I I I do think it would help in America, but I don't think you would ever do it. So I don't talk about it a lot because I think America is you have a big libertarian streak to the United States, even in the right wing parties, even the non-Trump area is it's like, don't tell us to vote. We'll decide whether we want to vote. And I understand that on some level. Like, I totally understand that. Like, the government shouldn't tell me how to vote. But my argument in Australia, I think sometimes people think, oh, what's happening? What happens if you don't vote? But the devil's always in the detail, and it's a $20 fine if you don't vote, right? So it's $20. And most people can get out of not voting by just sending an email. All you do is send an email, say, I was sick, I couldn't vote. And I've never, and Mary could tell me, could back me up here, is nobody ever gets in trouble for no voting. I've never seen it. As I like to say, it doesn't matter who's on the White House, try not to get into understand what's possible. I think they understand. Yeah. So I think compulsory voting does is it would stop someone from Trump ever becoming into power in Australia, because compulsory voting brings out the centre left and the centre right. Then Americans shouldn't complain if their roads and hospitals don't get fixed. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing that America should think about is, I think that libertarianism is a bigger problem than they realize it is, because I totally understand no trouble, just a shitty president, a tiny fine. Yeah. I think because again, a lot of people in the United States, they look at Australia or somewhere and they think it's too much of a nanny state. And I understand that, but, and I'm not even trying to argue the point about whether you fund hospitals or schools or anything like that. But I'm just making the point that compulsory voting, if it's done right, can stop people like Trump, because what happens is a lot of the people who didn't vote in America are usually center left, middle of the road, or center right. They're not the extremes. It's actually the extremes that generally not that everyone who's extreme votes, but if you have to in America, you have to bring out your base, right? Because it's not compulsory voting. In Australia, politicians don't have to just bring out their base. They have to they have to appeal to everybody because everybody's going to vote, right? So in Australia, you have to appeal to the left, to the right, to the centre, to people who don't pay attention to voting. In America, you've got to try to get out your base. And how do you get out your base? Like for example, for MAGA to get out his base, he has to appeal to the extremes, right? So that's so you're more likely in America to have extremes than you are in Australia, where so much of the middle that doesn't vote in America forces to vote. So what happens is that the extreme parties, like in Australia, we have the Greens Party, which is to the far left, and we have the One Nation Party, which is to the far right, because we have preferential voting, which is basically everyone. If you vote for the Greens, for example, and the Greens don't win, their vote goes towards your second choice. So your second choice might be the Democrats, and we don't have to worry about the Electoral College and swing states. Exactly, Mary. Yeah. So again, I'm not saying that I don't think it's ever going to be in America, but don't think about it as in like like an authoritarian thing or something, because honestly, it's so easy to get out of that it's basically more of a, what it does is it creates a culture of it's like, think of it like as a civic duty, right? It's a civic duty that you do once every 4 years. And if you grow up in a country where voting is compulsory, they teach about it in schools. So you grow up thinking that you're always going to vote. So therefore you feel more engaged. So you're like, oh, well, if I'm going to vote, I don't want to vote, but if I'm going to vote, I might as well find out what it's about, right? So a lot of people, even if they're not paying attention to politics for the 4 years, a couple of months out, they'll go, and I have friends like this who don't follow politics that closely, and they'll just say, yeah, I'm going to do some research before I vote. And so they spend a couple of weeks beforehand finding out their policies, finding out what they want, and these people go down and vote. Now, these people, generally in Australia who I know are like this, are middle of the road people. They're people who might vote the centre right party one time and they might vote the centre left, but they're kind of centrists, right? In the middle. Now, in America, a lot of these people wouldn't even vote because they're not. There's nothing there to sort of tell them to vote, right? So in America, you have a whole bunch of millions of people who never vote. They could be in their 30s and 40s, and they've never voted. So that they get into this pattern or a pattern of behaviour where they don't have to vote, and they just think, well, I never voted ever, so why should I? But in Australia, that doesn't happen. So even if you are a low information voter, generally you will spend a couple of weeks before you vote because you think, I don't want to, it's all part of, and we also vote on a Saturday, like, which makes it a lot easier for people to vote than on a Tuesday. Do you know what I mean? So we have an independent commission and the independent commission, their job is to make sure that it's easy for everyone to vote. It doesn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing. That's why we don't have something like gerrymandering could never happen in Australia because it's independent commission. So you imagine like California where they have an independent. Geez, I'm moving to Australia, Sandra. Yeah, come on, let's go, Sandra. You'll love it here. You'll love it. Beautiful beaches. Kangaroos can be a little, spiders. Okay, sure. We have some deadly spiders. Kangaroos, we have koalas, sharks can be a problem sometimes. But no, Sandra, go to Brisbane. Don't go to Melbourne. I'm joking. But yeah, and basically that's what I think a lot of this is that I think this libertarian thing, and again, it's not that I dislike everything libertarian, because, I'm libertarian when it comes to things like, whether people should take drugs or not. I mean, I don't, take drugs myself. I did a little bit in the 90s, like party drugs, that sort of thing, but that was a long time ago. But yeah, I'm just saying, like, some people who do that, terrible cold weather and well, some people who do that, in Australia, I'm all for legalizing that stuff. I think it should be like a thing that we don't encourage people to take drugs, but it's more of a social thing, more of a health thing that's not the government. So again, I'm libertarian in some ways like that, and I certainly understand libertarianism when it comes to wars overseas and things like that. But I do think that libertarianism lets someone like Trump get into power, right? And because you have so many low information voters, it allows Trump to get away with so many lies. Now, a lot of times when I watch Trump and I hear him, like the other day, he was on TV and they asked him, they said, "Oh, Ghislaine Maxwell wants a pardon, right? She wants a pardon." So, and he says, "Oh, Ghislaine Max, I haven't heard that name for years." Well, blast from the past. And it's like, what? You haven't heard that name. All any reporter or journalist has been talking to him about for the last 6 months is Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. And here he is saying, "Oh, I haven't heard that name for you." Like, it's such a ridiculous lie, right? It's just like such a lie. And I think to myself, I always think, first thing is, what are you doing? Like, everyone knows that's all anyone's been talking about the last 6 months. And then I think, why does he feel he can get away with that? Right? Why does he feel he can just make such an obvious lie and feel like it doesn't matter? And to be honest with you, he's not any reasons that he's not doing well in the polling. I don't think it has to do with his lying. I think it has to do with the economy not doing very well. I think it has to do with some of the wars overseas, like stuff like that. That's why he's not doing well in the polling. The tariffs, all this sort of stuff. Don't overreaching on the immigration thing, all that stuff. Right? Those things are the reasons why he's not doing well. They're not because he's lying, because he was lying all through 2024 and people still voted for him. So I think the reason is he gets away with it is, one, his base, and I'm talking about his hardcore base, will just believe anything he says or they don't care about it, right? And then you've got a whole bunch of people who don't vote at all, who obviously it doesn't matter anymore. But in fact, some of those people who don't vote at all might, if they were not forced, but if they were encouraged to vote, might actually vote left because they think, oh, well, it's actually, and also if those low information voters were encouraged to vote, right, they might have, that would force them to be more engaged, because if you're going to vote, you're going to go, well, if I'm going to have to vote, I'm going to at least find out a little bit about each side. And that might actually get them. And as we know, the more informed you are, the more likely you would vote for Kamala Harris. The less informed you might, and that particular polling was a pretty big difference in the things. Like, so the MAGA movement and Trump rely on people being low information voters to be able to get away with all his lies, his constant lies about everything. So that's a big thing. Good luck to those losing their food stamps. Yeah. Again, like another, Quimby, Americans often believe that everyone lies. Yeah. I think it's like, why, I think it is a strange thing that someone can lie so much and get away with it and not sort of, and not be a bigger deal than it is, especially when some of his lies are such big lies. Like, there's a difference between him lying, like if he's lying about his height, if he's lying about his weight, I mean, honestly, I couldn't care less about. It's funny, whatever, you know what I mean? But when you're lying about serious stuff, I think that's a whole different thing. When he says the economy has never been so good, um, when Trump lies as easy as a breeze. Exactly, mate. When he says the economy is doing really well, it's never done so great, and all this sort of stuff. I mean, that the economy is one of the number one reasons why people vote. Hi, Dave from California. It's one of those the top reasons. So again, like, why lie about stuff? But again, I don't think no one questions him. He supported. Yeah, they do. They do believe him. But I do wonder, like, if if there were enough people who were more engaged in politics in America, is a good way for him to lose a lot of his base or to his base to shrink and the other thing. So if you had more people who were informed, you would have less people vote for him, or at least you would have an extra group of people who don't vote at the moment vote for him. So, in my opinion, I think the Democrats need to do more to get those people who don't vote, right, who are low informed voters, and try to get them more engaged in politics because that way you're gonna have more people who new people who don't vote at the moment who come in and vote. Because otherwise he just takes advantage of that situation. Being uninformed is a choice. Yeah, it is. It is. It is a choice. I will say there's a difference between people who just choose to spend their spare time, watching TikTok videos instead of like at least doing the basics on politics. I do think it's like a civic duty to have at least some information. You don't have to spend all day on it. But then there are people like who have maybe two children, they got young children, they're working two jobs, whatever. I can understand, with some people why politics is the least thing. And again, as I said before, the problem is that you have this culture of um, both sides are as bad as each other, and I think Trump leans into that. So last year, when 2024 elections, he would, he would say something like, during the documents case, and you had Trump with the documents and you had Biden with the documents. And he kind of muddied the water a little bit by saying things like, oh, but Biden did this. He had documents as well. And then he had documents, but the devil in the detail was that Joe Biden Joe Biden was never trying to hide that he had documents. He was cooperating with the archives, and Trump wasn't. He was trying to, but here's the problem: Trump got away with it because people aren't listening to the details. All they're hearing is that Trump had documents and Biden had documents. That's no one is. Most of the people are not going below that surface. They're not going into like the indictments, and Section 8.9 of the indictment shows that Trump was moving documents around and all that stuff, but Biden wasn't. Unfortunately, most people aren't getting that information. They're just thinking, well, they're both as bad as each other. Therefore, I'm going to vote for whoever tells me they're going to fix the economy. And Trump was talking more about the economy than the Democrats were. They were, so dear America, please take peacefully to the streets and stay safe. Yeah, leave your White House most regards. Yeah, yeah. So again, so I think it is a bit of an issue that I've noticed a lot is that so many, and of course the MAGA people, right? The MAGA people, they're not highly educated either, so they're obviously easier to manipulate on that side of it. So where that basically with the healthcare thing, where you got the shutdown in America, and you've got a whole bunch of people like Stephen Miller, right? Who's just like, honestly, you couldn't pick a bigger caricature of someone who looks evil. Like just the way he looks, like he would be like a villain in like a Bond movie or something. You could totally see him as a villain. He just looks like the villain, and going around and saying, "Oh, I can't," that Democrats want to open it. Hi, Dave from California. They want to give, they want to do a shutdown, right? They want to do this shutdown just because they want to give illegal, immigrants healthcare. Again, just such an easy lie to push back, right? Such an easy lie to say, well, that's not true. And, but again, they all do it together. They almost, hi, Kimmy, they almost all say it at exactly the same time. They use almost word for word, actions. And it's such an easy lie to pick out. But they still do it because they know they're going to get away with it. And I think part of the other reason is because news is so fragmented at the moment, where you have people who watch news, for example, Fox News, and then you have other people who watch MSNBC. I'm not saying the same thing, but we're not watching the same news like we used to. in America and even in Australia before social media, um, we basically used to all watch similar news together as a population. So you'd have like 4 or 5 news channels, and everyone was watching the same things. We were reading the same papers. Now you could speak to, I could be watching completely different news than my neighbor. Like we could be watching completely different news. So how do you use Fox isn't actually news? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but to some people, Fox News is news, and to other people, and so those people are looking at Fox or Newsmax or OAN and all this sort of stuff, and they take that in as news, right? And so I think that's a big problem. Is that in a way, yes, online media is a good thing. I think it's good to have independent online media. The downside of being so much media, especially on everything, is that we're all watching different things, so we're not getting the same reality from everything. Um, we call it stupid here in this country. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. But, it's like, so that's what I mean by like, it's hard for the Democrats to get a message across how do you get the message across? Because remember, in 2024, I think one of the biggest problems of Kamala Harris and her team was they were just relying on legacy media and they're relying on mainstream media, and so many people don't get their news from that area anymore. Um, so they weren't talking to enough people who are out there. But you got people like Joe Rogan, who's not actually a news person, who's just a podcaster who does MMA, right? And he's become more important in news than a straight news journalist at Fox, at New York Times or Washington Post. And then I heard him say just the other day that if you're getting your news from me, like Joe Rogan, then that shows that there's something wrong with the media. So that shows that something in the media has gone wrong. Yeah, opinion news, exactly, Sandra. Yeah, I think what Sandra just said is really important, because what Fox News did is they made opinion news the most important thing of the news. Like if you go back to the 90s or the 80s, and all that sort of stuff, like back in those periods, most news was straight news, and then you would have an opinion column in the newspaper, which would or you would have, but the actual news that you watched was just straight news. Now it's all opinion with a little bit of straight news. It's kind of like flipped, right? So it's like the opinion news is the only bit that people listen to, and the straight news is the bit that was like, oh yeah, I think I'm yeah. And I think that's a problem, because opinion news is opinion news because it's biased. Anybody who's giving you their opinion, it's biased. Straight news is supposed to be news that's straight. Now, of course, a news organization, um, yeah, the 24-hour news, yeah, Rupert Murdoch changed that all that. And I accept no responsibility for Rupert Murdoch whatsoever, because he's now an American citizen. So so he left Australia and he went there. So I apologize. He went there, but he's American. So it's not. President Reagan removed in the fairness doctrine for media. That's right. He did. We have experts for reason in all areas of life. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, the it's like, again, it's like we don't rate Reagan is to blame for Murdoch. Bingo, Jose. Yeah, another fact. Yeah, apologize to. Yeah, yeah. Rupert Murdoch. I wish he'd stop talking an American accent, because it reminds people that he was an Aussie. So yeah, I wish it just talk. He's an American. He should, if you get American citizenship, you should start talking with an American accent. I think that should be the law in America, especially for Rupert Murdoch. At least the good thing is that his son Lachlan, who he's going to take over the business, he was brought up in America mostly in schools, so he has an American accent. So when Rupert passes away, the rest of the family sound American. So we can basically take no responsibility there, and no one will be reminded that initially that Rupert wasn't an Aussie. I'm looking forward to that day. So glad he's not an Aussie, but Lachlan Murdoch, yeah, Lachlan does live in Sydney. You're right, Mary. But Mary, I was hoping you wouldn't actually like, I was hoping, like, Mary, just keep it. keep it down on the down low about Lachlan living in Sydney. Let's pretend like, yeah, he will eventually, I'm sure eventually he will go to America. He's just here because, he's got his news organization here. But I like to think of him as American as well. Listen to him. He sounds American. Definitely doesn't sound Australian. But yeah, he does say, sorry, Joe. Yeah, that's okay, Mary. There's certain things we can't let Americans know about us. So yeah, let's keep that one down low. But yeah, but what he did is that he brought in that 24-hour news thing where in the United States, where basically everything was opinion news, and he made that really, really popular, right? And so that's a shame because and I get that it's like more entertaining. Opinion stuff is more entertaining than straight news. If someone just says to you, a man died today because he fell over a box. Like, it's but if a person puts an opinion piece on that and says, well, a man fell over a box because it was a conspiracy that the government wanted him to fall over that box, and it was a deep state that made him fall. So then it's like, oh yeah, that actually I want to hear more about that. Tell me about how the deep state made his box. So I totally get it's like human nature to want to follow opinion more than straight news, but I think straight news is still really important because it's like something that we can. It doesn't matter your politics; it's just telling you the news, and then you can make up your own opinion. We don't need other people to constantly tell us what to think. So except for that Rupert Murdoch is not an Australian. It's really important that you believe that, and it's really important that you understand that. Okay. But the other thing is like people like Stephen Miller, all right, and people like that, they opinion that analysis is okay. Fox is deceptive. Oh, Nicole, yeah, yeah. Look, I'm not against opinion or analysis at all. I just think that it's we should be able to discuss between the two. Yeah, exactly. We should be able to go. We should. I just don't think there's enough people watching or reading straight news because here's the way I look at it. I think the way you should do it is you hear a news story, you watch the straight news version of it. So you just hear like this happened, that happened, this person was involved, this person happened, and then you go look at the opinions, right? But if you only look at the opinion and you don't hear the actual just straight news, then you're only going to get based on that person's opinion. Where you might, if you watch the straight news part of it and then you looked at opinion, you might go, I agree with that, but I disagree where you said this and I disagree where you said that because you saw the raw data, you saw the original version of what that story was. Because if you just listen to the opinion, that person might leave out vital information because they're biased. And America had amazing news coverage and newsroom during the 60s, 70s. Now it's all called American news, is opinion, information, political. Yeah. Yeah, and look, it happens in Australia as well. Like the thing is that this is an interesting statistic that I read that Gen Z is one of the only generational groups that how they vote is not dependent on where they live, like whether they live in rural areas, in country areas, or when they live in the cities. The reason for that is because in the old days, not the old days, but like Gen X days like me or, older boomers, is that if you lived in rural areas, you would be getting news that is rural, right? Rural news, like local news. And if you lived in the city, you would get more city news. Now, so therefore you might then become more conservative because you're in a rural area, not just because you're around people who are conservative, but back in the day, that's right, but because you're also listening to news that is more local news, and that local news might be more about the country area and all that, the rural areas. Now with Gen Z, because Gen Z don't get their news from local news organizations, they get their news from the internet. So if you're a Gen Z person living in the outback of Texas or Alabama or something like that, and you're not watching the local news. I mean, what 18, 19-year-old watches the local news? They're on the internet. They're on Twitter. They're on Substack. They're on, TikTok. And they might start thinking, well, actually, my biggest thing is Palestine and Israel. And they might think, oh, actually, my biggest thing is, climate change or whatever. Now, because they're not getting their news the same way old people do. So the generation Gen Z is actually demographically voting very differently than other people did back in the day. And that's going to keep happening and happening where because people aren't getting their local news anymore and they're not basing that how they grew up, it's now, it's now wide open so that the old demographics aren't gonna matter as much. And it's actually one of the reasons why you're seeing um the way people voted in 2024 is that a lot of people, for the first time, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican, for the first time, people are now voting based on, you can tell someone's going to be a Democratic voter because they have a college degree. You can tell someone's going to be a MAGA voter because they don't have. That's one of the first times that you're able to just use education to make a decision on where that person was voting, and generally you'd be pretty accurate. So, I think a lot of the demographics are changing with younger people in Australia, right? In Australia, a lot of the younger people in the outer suburbs are now voting. Generally, they'll vote Greens, which is more the far left party in Australia. But as I said, in Australia, we have preferential voting, like you did in New York with Zoran Mandami, where you can vote for Greens and then put Labor to the Labor Party. He's like the Democratic Party, and therefore your vote doesn't get wasted. So in America, if you look at what happened in 2024, where there were a lot of people, young people, who were very concerned about what was happening in Israel and Palestine, they decided to either, in places like Pennsylvania, they decided to either vote Greens or don't vote at all, or some even actually voted for Trump for some reason. So I think, those people, had they voted Greens in Australia and they had that strong feeling about the Israel and they thought that Joe Biden wasn't doing enough, that person would then, that vote that went to the Greens, if they put Labor too, would eventually go to the centre left party. So the vote wasn't wasted. So again, I'm not trying to tell you guys what to do, but I just think it's a good way to show you guys how an Australian system can push people to the centre left and to the centre right. Okay. That's why Trump regime gutted education department and they're going to make it much harder. Yeah, exactly, Marty, because the Trump administration would know that the worst thing, the people who are going to vote for Trump are going to be less educated. So he doesn't want to have a lot of educated people. So I think that's, many people are single issue voters. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, Alex. A lot of people in the old days in rural areas were single issue voters based on their local area. But now, because of most people are just on the young people on the internet, those single issues could be most of the time has nothing to do with the area they're in. It could have something to do with another country, something that's happening in America. So it's it's interesting to see whether that sort of makes younger people more left wing or not. We do know a lot of young people voted for a lot of young men in America voted for Trump. And I think that's a cultural thing. I think there's definitely, he said it a couple of weeks ago, smart people don't like me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And he also said before, I love the poorly educated. So it's like a reciprocal thing, Sandra, which I think, they love him. And that's the thing with Trump is I I I think incels, yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of young guys a lot of young guys, they just I've said this before, is I would love to see young guys come back to the Democratic Party. I really would, because I actually think that it's in most countries, centre left parties are much better for young guys than they are for um, centre right parties, because they offer better things for education, offer better things for healthcare, they offer better things for work. But a lot of young men, unfortunately, they vote they vote on cultural issues. So they'll vote for, they think that the Biden party, the Democrats, were too censorious when it came to like cancel culture. They're obsessed with cancel culture and all that sort of stuff. So they, or transition. They just vote on cultural things. Um, and then they follow people like Joe Rogan or a lot of comedians, especially in that space, who are basically, you know, basically more sort of the centre right party under MAGA became like the edgy party, like the rebellious party, and the Democrats became like the goody goody party. You know what I mean? Like they're the goody goodies. And if you're a young guy, you don't want to be part of the goody goody party. They weren't going to vote for a woman. Yeah, exactly, Sandra. Yeah. And so they want to be part of that rebellious. Groups like the IDU and Heritage Foundation have been building MAGA for decades. Yeah, they also had Turning Point, with Charlie Kirk and all that stuff. So they do appeal more to young guys. I don't see Democrats want to make housing more affordable. Yeah, and exactly, Marty. And I think like Democrats could easily win young guys back with economic stuff. So just so you understand, in Australia, most young people, most young men at the last election voted for our centre left party, not the centre right party. And the reason they did that is for a couple of reasons. One is that basically we don't have Trump. Trump was never considered super popular here. But secondly, our centre left prime minister um, during the election stayed away from the culture wars. He was very smart. He stayed away from that, right? And I think that's a good thing to do. He does have some advantages. One of the advantages he has is he loves rugby league, and rugby league is like one of the biggest sports in Australia. Sorry, Mary, better than AFL. Yeah, but no, but it's like one of a big sport, right? And he's a big supporter and always has been a big supporter of that. And so what he started doing is he started going on all these like Joe Rogan type podcasts in Australia, talking about rugby league, talking about sports, talking about, all this sort of stuff. But he's not like, I love AFL, the end of fairness doctor. Yeah. So he went on all these sort of male podcasts, which has young guys like millennials and Gen Z people. And these guys are kind of into sport and all that sort of stuff. And he went on all their podcasts. And he did a lot, but he didn't go on there and be like Trump. He went on there and just was about his, talked about what he loved in sports, but he also talked about why young people should vote for him, and he based it on economics. And he always said, I want to give people, I want to make it easier for tradespeople. So just so you know, in America, like it's like vocational trading, like people who want to become plumbers or electricians or, a lot of young guys who generally do that stuff. And he appealed to those people. And so, and so in America, what I find is the centre left party will talk about university degrees, and the centre right party will talk about like vocational training or like plumbers and that. As where in Australia, you will talk about both because, but you'd be like, hey, great, if you want to become a doctor, well, you need to go to university. If you want to become an engineer, go. However, if you want to become a plumber, and plumbers have an important job, electricians have an important job, then we'll help you. We'll help you do either one. You can either, if you want to become a plumber, they make it easier. They do tax breaks so they can buy tools and things that makes it easier for them to get, to get an education. If you want to become a university person, they'll help you out there. So they're not picking sides. And I think that's a really smart thing to do because why would you want to, because both in the reality is not everyone is equipped or wants to become a doctor, but it's very important that we have doctors, but it's also important we have plumbers, electricians, people build homes, all that stuff. And so he appealed to everybody. And I think that was a really smart thing to do. So he went on all the podcasts, he did that, but he was himself. He wasn't trying to be toxic. He wasn't trying to be, he was just being himself. Canada does the same, and we are ramping up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny, like whenever I hear America talk about college or vocational training, which I think vocations like tradies and stuff like that, there's always like a divide, but I don't think there should be a divide. I'd like to see the next presidential candidate just talk about both. Talk about university degrees and also talk about, hey, we need people to build homes. We need electricians. We need tradespeople. We need all this sort of stuff. And we're going to help you do that as well. I mean, imagine how many young people are going to come over there, young guys, and, are going to come over and go, well, you know what? They're doing something for us. And then if MAGA, which I know what they're going to do because they always do it, it's always like break glass in case of emergency for MAGA is let's talk about trans people. Let's talk about, this sort of stuff. That's what they do when they're desperate, right? So that when they're losing the argument, they will talk about trans people because they've got nothing else. And this was in my opinion, a bad mistake by Kamala Harris in 2024 was ignoring that, pretending like that wasn't happening. And because what they should have done is they should have fought back with, well, we're offering this for homes, we're offering this for healthcare, we're offering this. So the only people talking about trans people in sports and all this are you guys, which is actually the truth because Democrats never talked about cultural issues. So I think that's really important that Democrats confront that but at the same time they don't throw people under the bus. They don't throw trans people under the bus. They don't throw gay people under the bus just to try to get. You don't have to bring in other people into your tent. You don't have to throw in the LGBTQ community under the bus. You just have to offer things that are, at the end of the day, the government culturally is limited to what they can do. You know what I mean? So, how a country is culturally will a lot of times be outside of their power. So I think they need to concentrate on economic stuff, and it's the economic stuff that's going to bring a lot of people into your party. And at the same time, just say, look, we're a big tent. I think saying you're a big tent is a really good thing to do as a political party because you don't want to limit yourself to being just for this gender, just for this, type of people. You want to be something for everybody, right? And then therefore you're going to get more people to vote for you. Then you can bring in policies because I think the cultural thing got way out of control, has way too much power. It's amazing how one ad that they ran about trans people in 2024 was so effective. I don't think it's the reason they won, but I think it was effective. I think it's a shame that that they can get away with so much of their lies about this, and a lot of it is based on the internet, young people online, specifically young men online, who get caught up in this world of where it's and look, the Democrats have a little bit to answer, not a lot. This is mostly coming from MAGA, but I think what the Democrats didn't do is they didn't give these young men an alternative. They didn't say to these young men, you don't need to do that. Here's an alternative that you could do. They never really gave them that. If you go online, and as I said, I have a young son who's been exposed to a lot of this stuff, right? Is that he will often say to me that him and his friends never see videos about inviting young people to watch stuff about the Democratic Party or stuff. It's always MAGA. It's always people like Andrew Tate or was Charlie Kirk or it's like Joe Rogan. Like they have so much choice and so many people trying to like get them in, right, and encourage them. And what are they saying to them? They're saying it's okay if you want to go to the gym, if you want to be like a man, you don't have to feel bad about that. I think there's a little bit of reality to that. I think that, young men should be able to go to the gym. Like my son is obsessed with the gym. I would say maybe a little bit too much, but he's left wing, right? He's not here. Yeah. So he's a little bit obsessed with the gym. And, he watches what he eats. And he's at university, he wants to be an exercise physiologist. So that's why he's obsessed with it, right? But he's very left wing at the same time. And so are his friends, but they're very much into fitness. And I'm thinking like, why does fitness or going to the gym have to be a right-wing thing? Like, I just think that's crazy. It doesn't have to be a right-wing thing. It should be like, and it shouldn't even be political. It should be like, I go to the, how did going to the gym become so politicized? It's like everything is politicized now. It's either, you're a carpenter. Well, you're right-wing. you have an university, or you're left wing. It's too we've politicized things too much. You should have him on sometime, Joe. My son, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he'd do that. So, serious, I cannot understand how you can vote based on one issue. You've got to look at the big picture to see what it would do. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do. I agree. You do really sort of need to look at the bigger picture. I think young people, the division exists because one group of humans. Yeah. Yes, I have one son obsessed with the gym too, and he's in his last semester of college, majoring in exercise science. Oh, exactly, Marty. I think we've said, yeah, exactly. MAGA cannot hold more than one thought at a time, James. Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the problem. Like, because I think what happens is MAGA says so many extreme things that it kind of forces people on the left to fight back against it, but then at the same time, maybe lose a little bit of the nuance in the thing. So what I mean by that, to give you an example, is the trade thing, like the carpenters and all that stuff. Like Laura Loomer, who I've always said is like the Rasputin of the MAGA party, which I think that's a pretty good analogy. But anyway, um, but I always she posted out once that that um nobody needs a university degree. Nobody. She's saying nobody needs a university degree. So I don't know who her doctor is, although based on her, it's probably like I don't know. It's probably not an actual real doctor. It's probably like a witch doctor or something. I don't know. And whatever she's into. And I think she says nobody should be going to university. Now, I think she's saying that because of politics. I think she's saying that because she knows that college educated people don't vote for her dear leader Trump. But at the same time, then I heard a couple of people on the left go, "Oh, vocational, like everyone needs to go to college, bang, 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 or something." And I was like, yeah, no, not everyone needs to go. So I think like when sometimes some people on us, we react to their extremism. And then because we want to, the nuance goes, actually, I'm glad I live so far away now. Yeah. We do, Mary. It's easy for us to do that. But yeah, exactly. So I think it's good to distance yourself, like, because the Laura Loomer thing it's just, she says so many crazy things. And then I think, what am I listening to her? And then I see she's got like millions, and like she would get more views than the CNN, MSNBC, and New York Times put together. That's how many views she gets on her. And she also has the ear of Donald Trump. Like she will say something, and then 2 days later, he will regurgitate the same thing that she said. And she's also very anti-vax. She's also very much against, she was the one, I remember her tweeting about that you need to have the mumps, rubella, but I love to travel. Australia is so far away. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Kamala did talk about non-college degrees. The message just didn't get through. Yeah, Nicole. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think the problem is, Nicole, and is that people are not paying attention to politics. It almost Trump is, you have to give Trump the credit, is that he's very good at marketing, and he's because he comes from a TV background. So he's all about TV, right? How do you get ratings? He's always talking about ratings, right? So when Trump runs for elections, he does slogans, and those slogans they work well because most people don't pay attention to politics. So if Kamala Harris is giving a detailed example of, for example, a home policy, and she goes into a lot of detail, nobody's listening to that. But people can listen to Build a Wall. Now, I'm not saying I like Build a Wall, but think about it. Build a Wall is a very easy thing to follow, right? It's like build a wall. Okay, so stop immigration. Gotcha. Everything he says is based on low information voters, that things that are going to get through them in like a couple of sentences or just a phrase. I think with us, because we intellectualize things a lot more, we are not good at marketing things because we're not good at slogans. I mean, the last slogan, so one of the slogans we did was like defund the police, which is like awful slogan. So we could do better with marketing in, marketing things or explaining things to people that are low information voters. Yeah, I think is really important because more and more people, less and less people are going to get engaged in politics, and therefore we have to find a way to reach those people. Yes, a simple, repetitive slogan. Exactly, Nicole. Yeah, yes, that's the key. They do good marketing, but never actually follow through with policies. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's why Trump always did well when he was the opposition in 2016, and then he got kicked out in 2020 because people didn't like the way he governed. But then in America, because people have the memory of goldfish, they voted for him again in 20. And I think part of that was inflation and people it's like they forgot what he was like. And he also lied to them so many times that people just believed him. So again, he always does well when he's opposition, but not because when you're actually in power, it's much harder to lie because you're the person in power. So you can't just blame Biden for everything. It's not as effective when you're the person in power, and especially when you've been in power for like a year or two, people are just not going to buy that. Even the middle's not going to buy that. So, the thing about where Trump's going to be in trouble in the midterms is that a lot of the people who voted for him but don't pay attention to politics, bumper sticker politics. Yeah, exactly, Alex. Yeah, um, they're not going to vote for him again because because they're voting on their everyday living experience. They vote on how much is gas prices, what is my rent, how much I'm paying for homes. That's what a lot of people vote on. And so if that doesn't change, it doesn't matter how many times Trump says, "Oh, this is the best economy," right? Because they're not even listening to that. They're just listening to what they're experiencing every day. And if that's not going down or getting better, they're not going to vote for him. He's also lost a lot of the young people that vote for him. They've lost enthusiasm for him. I think it's probably because of the Epstein files. Unfortunately, the Democrats tried to treat America like educated adults and actually yes, exactly. Yes. Democrats treat people with too much respect. I know it's a weird thing to say. He was Suzanne. He was able to pin them down. It did. A lot of people were upset about shutdowns, which were actually under him. Yep. Jose, the IDU chairman, former his Canadian protege is also former slogan. Oh yeah, yeah. Marnie, Dems badly need someone authentic with a great economic message. Yes, I agree, Marnie. Yeah, yeah, exactly. They need someone who can do slogans. They need someone who treats a big part of the American population like they're idiots. Unfortunately, and I'm not even saying this is an American thing. I think even in Australia, in most governments that do well, you can have two conversations as a leader when you're going to politics. You can have one for the majority of people who aren't paying attention, which is slogans or that, and you can have a more detailed conversation on podcasts and things. So you can have both the conversations. It's just that most people aren't going to be listening to the details. But at least the people who want to, you can give them that information. But most people are going to be listening to slogans, which in my opinion, based on what's happening in America and Australia around the world, the best slogan for the Democrats at the next election is building homes. And like all you have to say is we want to build homes, homes, build homes, build homes, build homes. It's like build a wall, except you want to build homes. And that is to me the best slogan you can do because it brings in so many people. I'm telling people for the thousandth time here, but you think about it. Who builds homes? Young men, right? Who builds homes? Carpenters, electricians, plumbers. So you're getting all those people. Who does building homes work? Extra supply will mean that there'll be, rents won't go up as much. Hopefully, house prices don't go up as much. So now you've got young people engaged. You've got young people engaged. You've got guys engaged. And you've got, men and women of all ages who can't afford to buy a home. You bring in something like make it easy. So in Australia, we brought in this policy where I don't know how it works in America, but in Australia, you had to have like a large deposit before you could buy a home. Well, what they did is they brought in a 5% deposit. So you only have to have a small deposit to buy a home, but it's means tested. So it's not for everybody. So It can mean that young people can buy a home with a smaller deposit. So things like that. And then you have a big healthcare policy, maybe like a public option. I personally wouldn't go for healthcare for all because I just think it's too complicated. I think you should start with a public option because it gets people in. Those two things, and just leave it at that. And then you can do other policies, but they're not your main policies. Just two policies: healthcare and building homes. And then other stuff you can talk about, but they're not your main things. I think, in my opinion, in a country like America, that would resonate with a lot of people on all sides, and it would cut. This is the important bit. It would cut what the MAGA movement does. It brought in young men by talking about cultural issues. Well, that's because they couldn't see something the Democrats were doing that brought them over there. But if you offer young men an easy to understand, right? Because it's young men, easy to understand, right? Easy to understand slogans that is about them, that helps them get jobs, that helps them buy homes, that helps them cheap rent, and then the other side is talking about trans people in sport. I mean, it's a no-win situation. Based on everything we know, people will vote on economics, including young people. And then you would just throw it back at them and say, why is MAGA so obsessed with trans people in sport? We're obsessed with building homes. We're obsessed with healthcare. We're obsessed with that. But MAGA have no solutions, so they want to talk about 3 trans people playing sports in America. It's that I have to go. Thank you for the information. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that. Slogans will help build homes. You'll build it. Yeah, exactly. And, I think it's just such an obvious thing that I think would work. I think the problem with helps them feel important. Yeah, I think the problem is with like a lot of that. When I listen to a lot of the Democratic strategists, and I've heard them before, listen to them. I had a couple on here once talking about the electoral college system, but I didn't get to talk to them about that. Is that I noticed that they overthink things too much, and I think the other things that they do is they see things from if you look at the strategists in the Democratic Party, they're probably very well educated, college degrees, live in the inner suburbs, young people, right? So they it's like they do strategies for themselves. It's like, well, I'm a college educated person. I live in the inner suburbs. I live in this, so therefore I'm going to do all my strategy. And then when they look at working class people, they look at them not through actual experience, but through just data or whatever. You know what I mean? They don't. I don't think they fully engage with understand them, because if they did, they would have come up with a lot more policies and a better way of framing them. I think the Democrats need also a better communicator. I think they need a really good communicator. I like Kamala Harris, but unfortunately, I do think with Kamala Harris, she does come across as too much like she could be um, a little bit too polished, and a little bit just sounds a little bit like she could be like a strategist or something. So I think it needs someone who can speak more naturally, someone who can speak like I really like Pete Buttigieg, but the problem with Pete Buttigieg is because he's gay, is he going to get the middle? I don't know. If anybody could do it, he could do it. I don't actually. Most Democrats are just Caucasians who know. Yeah, yeah. It's just like it's we. They need the Democrats need someone who can speak naturally, but sounds intelligent. Is so, but they can talk to a whole bunch of different people. I mean, I like Gavin Newsom, too guarded. Yeah, too guarded. Yeah. The thing with Democrats is they always, not all Democrats, but Kamala Harris, she was worried about what she was going to say. And I think part of that reason was that her strategists or people around her were telling her to be careful about what she says. And if you tell people to be careful about what you say, you get nervous, and you start and you start coming across as too robotic. I love JB Pritzker. Yeah. Yeah, I like JD Pritzker too. Yeah. Beto, Nicole? Yeah, Beto sounds good. Sadly, Pete has zero support from the black community. Yeah. But I will say, Suzanne, John Ossoff is my pick. Yeah, 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 yeah. I like him too. Sandra. Yeah, and he's kind of like centre left. Yes, John Ossoff, and he's half Aussie. Really? Is John Ossoff? I didn't realize John Ossoff was half Aussie. I'm going with John Ossoff now. Yeah. Yeah, I'll take credit for John Ossoff, but I will not take credit for Rupert Murdoch. Okay. So Kimmy Wynn yeah. AOC, yeah, I don't know. I think AOC might struggle in some other states. I don't know. I like AOC, but I don't know. Because you have the electoral college in America. He's a bit too young. Yeah, because he has the electoral college in America, you've kind of got to try to get all these people in the mid states. Her strategist are probably warning her to sound like not sound like It's a pity, with all this sort of stuff. My mum is from Sydney. Oh, good. Yeah, yeah. Oh, his mum is from Sydney. Oh, okay. Yeah. John Ossoff. Let's get behind John Ossoff. Let's get behind Let's stop behind John Ossoff. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm Tariko down and stuff. Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of good options. Wes Moore. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of good options. I don't see one person that like, when Barack Obama was around, it was like, oh, it's got to be Barack, or Hillary Clinton. Although I think Hillary Clinton's probably wasn't the right person. But I don't see anybody exactly. But maybe someone will come up. John is gorgeous. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think we'll see how we go. But yeah, I think it'll be good to get someone in the Democratic Party because I don't think Trump is going to run again. I'm not even sure Trump's going to be, he's not the healthiest person in the world. So I think it'll be good to have, I think it'll probably be JD Vance. AOC is wild card for me. My child told me about her because she chatted with players while gaming as part of her campaign. Yeah. Yeah, she definitely get the young people's vote. Unfortunately, young people don't vote that much, not as much as older people in America. So that might be a problem. But young people do create an online vibe because even if they don't vote, young people are big online and, they do a lot of stuff. So I do think it's really important to get young people because they create that energy. So even if they don't vote themselves, that was like the young people, the young men who voted for Trump, they created a lot of energy. You could sort of see that they were, there was this young group of people who were going to vote for Trump. I don't see someone with the it factor yet. I miss Obama. Yeah, they have to drag digital. Yeah, exactly. The thing is in Australian politics is that you don't have in America you can only be in power for 8 years. Well, there's actually no limit in Australia how long you could be in power for like 30 years as long as you keep getting voted in. So there's actually no limit to how many times you can give it. I hope it doesn't come across as authoritarian, but the reason for that is because in Australia, the Westminster system that we use, like also in England, is the same. The UK system and in Canada is the same. Is that you don't necessarily vote for the leader, you vote for the party. So you're voting for the party. So you in Australia you vote for say you would vote for like the centre left party, and then it's up to the actual party to decide who the leader is. So it's different. So you do of course take into consideration who the leader is, but ultimately that leader could get kicked out by their own party. So when you vote, and I actually don't mind that. And the reason I don't mind that is because nobody knows, like you don't know the leader. So that leader could sound really good to us or whatever. But behind the scenes, that leader could be a real arsehole. They could be like, get on TV and say the most wonderful things in the world. And then behind the scenes, they're just stabbing people with pens all day. And we wouldn't know. It's like, yeah, but he's stabbing us with pens. We had to get rid of this person. And they're like, yeah, but when he's on TV talking to everyone, he sounds like a really nice guy. Yeah, but you have no idea. We got marks all over our body. I'm from the Caribbean. We also have the Westminster Parliament. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, this is the reason why they have it, because they're basically saying, you don't know, the public doesn't know what that person is like behind the scenes. They might not be competent, and therefore, they might remove that person because they're not confident. They're not competent. and they would have to get the majority of the people to vote against it. Now, it's not common, although it has happened in Australia a bit over the last 10 years. Generally, what happens is people don't get kicked out because they're a bad person, although there is one incident, but I won't go into it. But they'll get kicked out because their rating, their polling is really low. And when their polling gets really low, they will say, look, we need to get a more popular leader in. And therefore, they sometimes get pushed out for a more popular leader. So it's generally because they think Canada just had by-election because the Maple failed with, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think, I don't know, I have to go. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kimmy. Well, guys, also have to go as well, but thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for all the love hearts that I've been getting. I've really enjoyed that as well. I will do another Substack live in a couple of days. I'm going to do it actually with a guy called, so he's actually also, he's also a another Substack person. So I hope you listen to that in a couple of days. If anybody in my audience ever wants to come on and talk to me, we can always, I would love to invite you on and have a conversation with you as well. I think that'd be cool. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, Alex. Thanks all the usual people for coming on. But yeah, I'll be doing another one in a couple of days, and hopefully you can listen then. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Bye.